So let's start with the second talk. We have June. June is a product designer at Red Badger. He's having 6 years of experience in designing products and solutions for the end users. He also studying a diploma in cognitive psychology, and he's going to talk about today design and psychology. Welcome, June.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, good. Thank you, Fosso. So today's talk is all about the interaction between design and psychology. It's a topic that I find really interesting, and I first properly appreciated because of this man here, Donald Norman, who I'm sure many of you will know, because he popularized the field of UX design in the 90s. And he wrote this book, The Design of Everyday Things, and this is a great quote. So he said, "Design presents a fascinating interplay of technology and psychology, and designers must understand both." And what happens when we forget or we fail to acknowledge these basic principles of psychology, we end up forcing our users into error. So this is a symbol of frustratingly bad design, and it's been so-called the Norman door. And you might notice that there's a pull handle on the door, even though it's a push door. And it seems like such a simple oversight, but these doors are actually surprisingly common. And this very weekend I was in the Barbican, and on the very same door, I failed to push it 3 times. And I felt like an idiot. So bad design. So in the next 20 minutes, I'll be talking about this interplay of psychology and design. And I'm going to start off with the special relationship that they have and the history of that relationship. I'm going to argue that good designers are already using psychological principles. I'm going to suggest that we all have biases, and those biases can be used for the user or against the user. I'm going to talk a little bit about how our attention has been commodified and some recent theories there, and summarize why it's really important to design ethically with all of this in mind. So the first topic is this relationship between the two. And you're probably aware of some of these principles that UI designers have published. So this one's Donald Norman's 6 principles. So visibility and feedback are really important to give the user. Constraints help reduce errors. Mapping is how you perceive your control and the effect onto the real world. So that might be the up and down key on my cursor and the effect that that has. Consistency on your products, so users are familiar and feel in control. And affordances. So affordances are like the pull handle. They give you a visual cue of how to interact with the actual design. So I want to suggest that it's not just psychological principles that we use in our designs, but designs actually have quite a powerful way of changing the way we think. So if we take two inventions from early modernism, the map and the clock, both of these have helped change the way we think about very abstract terms of space and time. And arguably, the map has shaped the way the world exists today, geopolitically, and the clock has helped make time into something that's a measurable unit, which has had an amazing shift on the way we carry out tasks. So this is a quote from a cartographer. The use, and here they're talking about the map. So the use of a reduced substitute space for that of reality advanced the evolution of abstract thinking. So a nice quote to summarize how design has helped reshape the way we think about the world around us. So it's really a two-way relationship. It's not just psychology informing how we design. Our designs can change the way we think. So my second point is good designers are already psychologists, so to speak. So this is a passage of text and it's by all means very legible, but it's not at all readable. Trying to scan a whole dictionary full of passages of text like this will be pretty useless. And so typographers help shape the text so it's easily and readily processed. So this is a quote from Robert Bringhurst, who many regard as having written the typographic Bible. And here he describes that typography is really based on not only on how we perceive beautiful things, but it's also based on how we interpret those things psychologically. So they're based on the invisible human mind. And if you're making your passages of text hard to read, your users are actually perceiving that it's the tasks that you're presenting them with are hard to do. So this psychological research gave different users the same passage of text, but formatted in different ways. So the one on the left is written in Arial, it's a readable font, and the one on the right is written in a script. It's quite illegible. And when asked how long users would think these tasks would take, those who read the passage of text in the illegible script font believed it to take twice as long as those who had read it in Arial. So it has a real impact on the way your users perceive your product. And this leads me on to Gestalt. So in the 1920s, I'm sure many of you have seen these kind of diagrams. Some German psychologists looked into how we perceive shape. So on the left-hand side, we know there isn't a triangle there, but regardless, we still see a triangle. And the example on the right, it's very difficult to see both figure and ground at the same time. You usually see one or the other. And all of these kind of principles inform how we design. So this is quite useful when we apply this knowledge to design our interfaces, because we can create meaningful relationships between different elements in their proximity, by using color, indicating their relationship with the same shape or size. Animation, so moving them in the same fashion. Alignment, so many of you will know that designers love grids. And by sharing a common area. So when I was a kid, TV remotes looked like the one on the left. And that is a really bad use of these psychological principles that I've just talked about. So the numbers on the left-hand side, which probably have the most importance, are grouped together with all of these other functions that are pretty irrelevant. Whereas you move towards what we have today, and it's been reorganized and grouped in a way that is more familiar and intuitive. All the numbers are grouped together. Their shape and form is different to the volume and the channels. And so, yeah, I think we've seen an evolution in something as everyday as the TV remote. Chunking. So I'm going to imagine that Red Badger have just created a bank. And if I were to give you this credit card, I'd imagine that it would probably lead to a lot of forced errors when you order something on Amazon, because trying to recall these numbers in your short-term memory is actually very difficult when it's addressed in a long passage of information. It hasn't been broken down into chunks that are easier to process. And that is primarily why we try to chunk long bits of information into digestible forms of communication. And this idea of chunking isn't just isolated to information, but when we think about carrying out quite complex tasks like cooking, this is probably one of the most cognitively challenging things you can do, because you're mentally time traveling. You're thinking about all of these individual tasks that each have their own time frame, and you're trying to put that together into something bigger. And so in the same way that we chunk these large bits of information, it's really important to break down these big tasks into smaller ones. And in that regard, cooking a Christmas dinner is actually quite similar to software development, because we have something that's so insurmountably difficult and overwhelming at the start, but break those down into doable chunks, and it becomes a lot more manageable. And that's quite similar to how we think about agile software development. So I'm next going to suggest all of us in this room share psychological biases. And I'm going to give you a little task. So a bat and a ball cost £1.10. The bat costs £1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? The bat and the ball cost £1.10. The bat costs £1 more than the ball. Anyone brave? Anyone got an answer? 10p? 10 pence. Yeah. 5p. 5p. Who said 5p? Okay. You can have a beer. That's the right answer. Oh, sorry. So most of us would say 10p, right? It's quite an automatic response. I mean, that would make the total £1.20, not £1.10. And the reason for that is we're relying on our automatic system. So you might have heard of Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he argues that, for the most part, we're living with this automatic system. It's fast, automatic, it's used for everyday decisions, it's unconscious, and it's also error-prone, as we've just witnessed. The reflective system, on the other hand, is slow, effortful, it's for complex decisions, it's self-aware, and it's more reliable. So if you compare maybe making a cup of tea to thinking about applying for a job, those are the kind of things that I'm talking about when I'm talking about this automatic system and this reflective system. If I go into an example where people experience decision fatigue, this is really an illustration of what happens when this system two, this slow system, fails. So we'd all hope to think that judges have a bias-free opinion, but everyone is human, and they definitely don't. But this study looked at 8 Israeli judges over a period of 10 months as they looked at over 1,000 cases. And what you'll see is that if you are if you're going on trial, your chances of going free are substantially higher at the start of the day than at the end of the day. As in, tired and hungry judges basically are more likely to sentence you to a criminal sentence, which is quite astounding considering we'd hope that they are these bias-free individuals. So that leads me to customer journey mapping and thinking about users in a more holistic way. So customer journey mapping is a tool that is primarily used in service design, but we go through what users are thinking and doing and feeling. And these are really this is a really important time when we do this practice to think about whether users have had a busy day, whether they are hungry, whether their current environment is distracting, whether they're multitasking, whether they have to absorb lots of new information, new words, new concepts, whether they've done something like the task they're doing before. It's kind of giving that user a more holistic identity. And this is a really, really nice example. So Monzo published this concept on their blog last year. And the whole premise is that research shows that 1 in 4 people with a mental health problem are also in huge amounts of debt. So, and unsurprisingly, the greater amount of debt you're in, the more stress you're in, and So with that in mind, they had this concept of reviewing your late night spending. Again, research showed that sufferers of bipolar disease tended to spend more on needless items late at night. So by turning this feature on, you could review your spending up to 24 hours later and cancel that payment, which is a really nice way of kind of going beyond the user's immediate needs and thinking about what they might be, whether they have more cognitive lapses later on at night. And my next point is understanding all of these biases we have can help us design for healthier behavior. So this is a great book, and it was published about 10 years ago. And a lot of governments have since kind of adopted a lot of these ideas that have come out of the book. In a nutshell, a nudge is any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. And a lot of us in this room are probably choice architects. We determine the choices that people make in their lives. So if we look at some examples, we can see how nudging can really tackle these great big social problems, like helping men aim in the toilet. So in this example, something as seemingly insignificant as placing an image of a fly in the urinal drastically cut down cleaning costs. And this is something I came across a few weeks ago in South Africa, a water fountain that gives you feedback on its use. So helping you identify using the water fountain with reducing your own consumption of water bottles. This is a really interesting example where I think this was done in a trial in California, and on your electricity bill, users were given their usage compared to their neighbors. And where your usage is higher than your neighbors, there's a greater tendency to, as a result, to reduce your own usage. Conversely, if your energy consumption is lower than your neighbors, as a result, people were more likely to then increase their energy usage. So it has to be done quite carefully. Quite hilariously, if you give someone a smiley face and their energy usage is less than their neighbors, that actually manage to level their energy consumption. So it's amazing to think how easily we kind of compare ourselves to our social peers and how that affects our decision making. So, summarized kind of nudge theory. People make good decisions in contexts in which they have experience, good information, and prompt feedback. So I've been talking for quite a while, so I'm going to play a little video. It's another little task for you.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
Out for cyclists, yeah. If you didn't already, look out for cyclists. And so that's a really good example of I guess, the constraints of our attention. When we're paying attention to one thing it's very difficult for us to pay attention properly to something else. And that particular example is what we call inattentional blindness. And what I want to come to is, to argue is that our attention is now quite heavily a commodity. We don't really pay in terms of a hard currency for a lot of the services we use online. Increasingly what the currency is your attention. And we know that there is a limited capacity of that. So another quote from another Nobel Peace Prize winner, Herbert Simon, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention and a need to allocate that attention efficiently among the overabundance of information sources. And it's quite amazing to think that it's only 500 years ago that the printing press was created, and you think how much more exponentially the information around us is, and you wonder how best to focus our attention. And some of the ways in which companies are holding our attention is quite dubious, to say the least. And what happens when we have this infinite scroll kind of feature is we're kind of really being stuck in the middle of a flow. We're not really getting to our tasks that we need to do. Similarly, autoplay. When we watch Netflix, I don't know if any of you have ended up binge-watching a whole series on a weekend, is this autoplay feature is really eroding our sense of will and our sense of agency. And those really actually contrast with a lot of the design principles that have kind of emerged in the last 10 or so years. They really talk about user control and freedom. And what this is about is kind of taking that away from the user. And another way in which technology has kind of shifted the way we communicate with each other is this idea of a receipt when your recipient has read your message. So, why haven't you responded? I know you're getting my text. It's kind of giving, with this status in the corner, it's giving the recipient an implicit, was giving the sender an implicit expectation that the recipient really should respond as soon as they get the message. Which is, again, I'm not saying that it's outrightly bad, because there might be some useful applications for this, but it has really shifted the way we start communicating with one another. And when we talk about addiction with social media, for instance, a lot of these psychological principles come out of behaviorism, which was the predominant form of psychological study in the 1930s. But this man, B.F. Skinner, he placed rats and pigeons in boxes. And when they hit a stimuli of a button, they would get a reward. And the really interesting thing was when you change the consistency of that reward, that's when these animals started going crazy and relentlessly pressing these buttons all day long, which is kind of what we start seeing with our Facebook feeds. There was a time when they were really user-centered and would give you everything you needed from your favorite friends in a few short scrolls, but more and more so, they adopt this variable reward scheme that keeps you more addicted to the technology. And what I want to suggest is, it's a bit like the tragedy of the commons, which is a metaphor that first sprung up in the late 1800s. But the idea is, if we share a field together and we each have our own collection of animals, we're all going to put as many animals we can in the shared field, because you personally you maximize your returns, even though we collectively suffer for the degradation of the field. And it's been applied to many kind of environmental models, but I kind of see this as a good metaphor for the digital space we live in. A lot of these companies are using their design, they're making ethically dubious designs in order to get as much attention from us. And the effect on our society as a whole is kind of quite dramatic. So I think really today it's more important than ever as a designer to think about design ethics and to respect the limited attention that everyone does have. And I want to show this example of the Fairphone, which is a wonderful example of ethical design, not just in the way they construct the phone, which is quite modular, and if one part breaks, you can replace it with another part. They also are very open with their business model. But I think most impressively, they have an interface that respects the user's attention. So on your home screen, you'll be told how long it's been since you last looked at your phone. And I have a friend who has this phone, and when they realize that they've last looked at the phone 2 minutes ago, they will put the phone back down. It also tells you how long you've had your phone for and how long your battery will last with its current usage. So not actually just trying to encourage you to download the latest thing or to upgrade your phone, but to keep it as long as possible, and also to put your phone down if it's going to run out of battery. And another really interesting thing they've adopted is this privacy note that you get when you download an app. Each app you download, and I'm not sure if this works for every app, but it gives you a privacy rating of the app that you're downloading. So I'm just going to summarize. I think design and psychology have had a really long history, and they're so closely interrelated. And good designers will already be using that to help users consume information efficiently. And the important thing is to not abuse the biases that we all have for profit, which is what we've been witnessing. And in this age of increasingly, where attention is increasingly commodified, I think design ethics are probably more important now than they ever have been. Thank you.
Great, thank you, June. Do you have any questions?
Thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. I just want to pick on that 6th point you made about designing ethically. Mm-hmm. How would you, as a designer, defend the user's corner when it comes to ethical design? Because that Fairphone example was great, but imagine presenting that to someone who's developing an app that wants to drive engagement. How would you kind of defend that corner?
So is the question how designers would defend their stance against, say, their employer?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's a really good question. And I think it's really up to the designer, firstly, to think about whether they want an employer whose business model is heavily built up around eyeballs and advertising. Another thing I think is really important, which hopefully we'll see in the future, is this idea of ethics coming more into how we teach design, because we're quite empowered to make those decisions.
Thanks for the presentation. So similar question. I think the Fairphone is kind of an extreme, cool, nice case of what could be done. And on the other side, we have the evil kind of social media thing. But I have the feeling that in between, there is this mass of things that create a lot of stress and that we accept. So, you know, if you go on booking.com, on EasyJet, Ryanair, all these guys, you know, you go by essence in the evening when you're already tired, stressed, and you're late on booking. And everything is like, you have 5 more minutes, you are 250 guys looking at the same ticket. You know, everything is done. And I think you can see a replication of this in the physical world. If you go in an airport, everything is done for you to spend time consuming, and nothing is done for you to enjoy your kind of traveling. So I guess it comes back to the same, I don't know if it's a question, but I'm wondering, I mean, I don't know if it's a question for you, but I'm wondering what really is in the power of the designer Is it really like refusing what your boss wants you to do?
Yeah.
Is it more that there is a lack of, some kind of general rules that, common sense that everybody agrees to?
Yeah.
But at the moment, it feels pretty crazy, what's really accepted everywhere. And again, without looking at the extreme case, just the average, It's more a comment than a question.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. I don't know if you're aware of the triple bottom line. That's this concept that's around, it exists to kind of describe social enterprise. So we don't just think about the bottom line being profit, but we also think about the social and the environmental cost of everything involved in the production of whatever it is. And I think there needs to be something quite similar for the way we design digital products, because if we design without any of that empathy involved with respect to the user's attention, that's when we get these real addiction problems. So I think it's bringing in that awareness into the mainstream. Yeah.
Good, great. Do you have more questions?
Thank you. Very, very nice presentation. I loved it. A kind of similar question that this gentleman had. So I've been working in the digital field for quite some time in larger digital transformation projects. And one of the key things that I've noticed is when a designer comes in the room, he has amazing ideas. Right? He has really brilliant ideas. But then to take the ideas and then talk to a client or even internally, sometimes based on the need, right? So I work with Accenture, Deloitte, and other guys, right? But when it comes to actually bring that to life, I see that sometimes there is a struggle. And now what I saw, I could see, that you have this way to convey what you want, and your end user may not necessarily be one segment. It can be multiple segments. And the way you showed it, I could kind of see a story here. But how do you actually handle, larger transformation projects where you say, you know what, my design is based on some level of research. Here is how it is. How do you handle conflicts in your,
Yeah. I guess the client has got to want to have that interest, so it's not easy. If they're not going to put any budget into research, then how do you validate your decisions? It's a bit of a chicken and an egg kind of problem. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much. First of all, I used to have the privilege of working for the company that distributed Fairphone in the United Kingdom, and they sold out continuously because people were really interested in the ethics and the modular parts of it. So every time they got the new version, it kept selling and selling and selling. Limited stock, keep it low, high. So that's just a comment. But just really more, the question was about ethics, do you think ethics win through against this saturation? Because people saturate you and say, 2 seats remaining on a particular flight, this price is going to go up and these sorts of things. Or do you think people that actually turn off from that, like Fairphone, win through? Or will win through because we've just got that saturation point now?
I think the awareness is growing, especially with what's happening in the news. But I think there is also that deeper problem of businesses and KPIs being centered around the wrong things. So what was the original question?
Well, I think the main question is the Fairphone's a very good example of ethics winning through. But I mean, obviously you've got to have technology. But we moved on to things like EasyJet and other companies, and this saturation of information. And is it really that ethics and standalone products will win through more than sort of this constant emotional entrapment that we live in?
Yeah, I hope so. I think one success story is Patagonia. Like, they're very, very ethical, and they kind of helped push the doors for more environmental and ethical manufacturing processes. And I think those kind of success stories like the Fairphone and Patagonia are really instrumental in driving this. I know Tristan Harris, who speaks up a lot about the abuse of these big Silicon Valley companies. He's built an advocacy platform called Time Well Spent. And he kind of hopes that we will see a consumer-led change, much like the organic cotton movement, which was really a bottom-up process rather than a big industry-wide shift, if that makes sense. So I don't know what the future holds, but hopefully something like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. I will ask one really easy question now. What's your name? I missed it.
Jun.
John what?
Jun. My name?
Yes.
J-U-N.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, John, 2 years from now or 3 years from now,
Yeah.
how do you see people that, for example, charity, right? They're doing an amazing thing, but they're putting things inside my door, like through my door, boom. That's, it's a weird behavior, but they're doing a very good thing, right? They're getting clothes, whatever. What is the fine line, or how do you see that people are using maybe these things, or using of our, emotions or whatever, to do good, but using those things, those dark UX patterns?
I think ultimately there needs to be free choice. So when we think about nudge theory applied to social policy by governments, the key thing is that the user has information readily available, and ultimately whatever they choose is their choice. And I get your point, because who determines that the ideal behavior is best for that individual? So there is a fine line, but I think where you think about kind of eating habits and obesity and smoking, like, it's a lot easier to see a black and white, but absolutely there is a grey line, and I don't know how best people decide what's right or wrong, but ultimately free choice and what they call libertarian paternalism is kind of paternal, but you leave that free choice available for the user.
More questions?
Just kind of thinking aloud. So you, at the very beginning, you're saying that designers and psychologists sort of work in both ways, and then we will talk about the ethics. So would that be a designer's role to kind of leading the users to behave in a more ethical way? Do you reckon that's how we should aim ourselves, like to be in that sort of direction? I mean, obviously, it's actually, I'm kind of thinking users also particularly playing a bigger role actually to driving the industry changes, because they're having their money power, obviously. But how then you see that, obviously, it's not a big question, but how do you reckon the designer can play even bigger role to make that change?
Yeah, I think that's kind of been a running theme with the questions, is how do we empower designers? Actually, I think it was in the 80s, like, graphic designers did kind of create this manifesto of not wanting to sell, like, cat food, or, whatever it was, in the age of, mass commodity selling stuff. It's a really tough one. I think we need to educate designers on best practice and ethical practice. Probably talks like this will help. And yeah, new companies like the Fairphone hopefully will kind of create this space for more empathetic designs, I guess.
Great. One last question before we go to the break we have.
Yeah, I think it was more to on the question of charities using these kind of evil marketing techniques to do something good, and I just wanted to say, I think I think it's led by businesses. So if businesses behave in an ethical manner on these questions, I would imagine that charities hopefully would not use this kind of legacy of a time where there was no control. But then on what you say about Fairphone, I don't believe that good will drive good. I mean, it would be nice, but I think at some point it needs to be something that's decided. So I don't know if it's a policy at the level of, politics or something like this. But yeah.
Which is probably driven by disastrous PR stories like the ones we're seeing.
Yeah.
Which is good. Maybe it's hit rock bottom to the point where things are going to change.
Great. Thank you, June.
Cheers.